Dang. Chapter 29. The sedan chair came to a halt, the curtain lifted by the entourages. Xia Yulo's steps in the sedan chair were steady. He bent over, made his way out of the sedan chair, and lifted his head. Zhang Xian was walking ahead of him. Without looking back after getting off the sedan chair, Zhang Xian waved his hand at his back, indicating for Xia Yulo to follow. Xia Yulo hastily followed. Walking beside Zhang Xian, amidst the company of respected senior eunuchs and junior eunuchs, their figures sauntered into the garden. The garden wasn't grand, yet it exuded a simplistic and unadorned beauty. This large group of people went round and about, entered the main hall and took a turn that led to the side hall. As his gaze scanned through layer after layer of curtains, and passed by set after set of folding screens, Xia Yulo realized that there were eunuchs everywhere. Feeling both astonished and self-conscious, Xia Yulo was just like a mallet that was accidentally dropped into a heap of oranges, a unique being among all the rest. "Miss Zheng has arrived." A voice called out from behind the elaborately painted folding screen using gold ink, sharply and confidently, as if the owner of the voice was accustomed to ordering people around. "The name Miss Zheng is not for you to call." Zhang Xian replied from this side of the folding screen with a big smile on his face. Nettled by the slow-walking eunuchs who led the way, Zhang Xian rudely brushed them aside and strode forward earnestly. Xia Yulo immediately followed. A pungent scent of incense filled the chamber they just entered, a chaotic mixture of agar wood, cosmetic powder, and ambergris. The smell was so strong that it was capable of inducing a headache. A square marble table could be found beyond the folding screen. On the table lay a set of Madiao tiles, and seated at the east and south sides of the table were two powerful eunuchs. They were wearing headbands with cloud embroideries and colorful brocade robes. Upon seeing Zhang Xian, the two of them stood up with fist and palm salute as they playfully called out Jushu, which was recognizing Zhang Xian's seniority. /Note, Shu denotes uncle, Ju denotes ninth, Jushu translate to ninth uncle /. Xia Yulo stood behind Zhang Xian, sensing those two eunuchs' unobtrusive gazes towards him, gazes that were steeped with hidden intent that landed on himself only for a brief moment before immediately darting away. "Xia Yulo, my favorite person." Zhang Xian took one step aside to reveal Xia Yulo, half-jokingly pushing his shoulder. A Tanhua on the top list of the imperial examination, a man of knowledge. The two eunuchs immediately poured out compliments based on Zhang Xian's words, although their commendations were nothing but equivocal, cliched formalities. Being well aware that everything they did was for the sake of Zhang Xian, not only did Xia Yulo feel displeased, rather, he became quite embarrassed. Zhang Xian paid no heed to the eunuchs. He went forth to take the main seat, tossed the dice, and yelled, "A6. As the two eunuchs shook their sleeves and were about to utter something, a pair of figures conversing with a low voice emerged from behind the small folding screen north of the room. The first thing Xia Yulo heard were their footsteps, first a step, and then a shuffle, which sounded more familiar to him than anything else, as they belonged to Liao Jixiang. "Ba Shu has done talking," the eunuch sitting to the south asked. "Shall we begin?" /Note, Shu denotes uncle, Ba denotes 8, Ba Shu translate to 8th uncle / Liao Jixiang was in a red robe today. He was unusually pretty, wearing also a headband and applied a faint layer of rouge on his cheeks. Although Xia Yulo didn't dare to examine it closely to determine if it was the box he had given Liao Jixiang. It seemed that Liao Jixiang's arrival had taken Zhang Xian by surprise. Zhang Xian was stunned momentarily, and then, like a wild dog that suddenly had a leash around his neck, his dominant air was completely defeated. The man conversing with Liao Jixiang was a stout eunuch with freckles. The two of them stood side by side, their sleeves entangled. Judging by their posture, their hands must have been held tightly together underneath. Xia Yulo fixed his stare at the wrinkled folds formed on their sleeves, his brow furrowing, looking just like a miserable lover whose dear loved one was seduced by someone else. Liao Jixiang noticed his gaze, so he discreetly withdrew his hand and backed away from the stout eunuch, who hastily exclaimed, "Just another moment, uncle, I'll give you another 1/10 of the price." Clearly, they were negotiating prices. Xie Yulu had also realized by now that the stout eunuch seemed to have the surname Zhao. He was in charge of the city gates of Yingtianfu, and even though his rank wasn't high, he was extremely affluent. At some time, unbeknownst to Xie Yulu, Zhang Xian had already inconspicuously surrendered the main seat, and he was now casually circling around the table. With his head proudly lifted high in the air like a lofty, distant cloud, Liao Jixiang carried himself gracefully, floated to the main seat at ease and rolled the dice again. Also a 6, the crowd roared. Ba Shu had already gotten a 6, why else should we roll? Ba Shu, please take your tiles. This was the eunuch's world, and what they were playing was a eunuch's game. Xie Yulu watched Liao Jixiang as he sat at the center of this maneuver, his figure ever so untarnished, graceful, and frail. He was worried that Liao Jixiang couldn't support this restless extravagance on his shoulders. At this moment, Zhang Xian instructed Xie Yulu from behind, "Chun Chu, play a few rounds for me. I'll have a few words with Zhao San." Xie Yulu understood him well. Zhang Xian didn't want to sit next to Liao Jixiang, which was exactly what I wanted and wished for, Xie Yulu thought. His eyes discreetly shifting towards the slender white hand at the edge of the table. Liao Jixiang didn't spare Xie Yulu any unnecessary attention, but as Xie Yulu sat down beside him, he could distinctly feel the sudden rise of tension in Liao Jixiang's body. Like a newly sprouted old twig or a newborn ripple unexpectedly formed in the water, Liao Jixiang was invigorated with much vibrancy. The tiles were made of animal bones, and the back of the tiles was covered by a glass surface, which made them feel both warm and cool to touch. As Xie Yulu shuffled the tiles, his hands intentionally brushed against Liao Jixiang's side of the table. He shouldn't have done that, yet he just couldn't control himself. For every fleeting touch of their fingertips, Xie Yulu felt like his heart was about to leap out of his throat. In the face of Xie Yulu's discreet moves, Liao Jixiang betrayed no hint of avoidance, so Xie Yulu grew even bolder. As he hooked Liao Jixiang's leg under the table with his foot, he even turned his head blatantly to directly fix his gaze upon him. Everyone at the table noticed that something was off with these two, but none would ever think that their relationship was something like that. After all, the whole city of Nanjing were convinced that they were enemies. Xie Yulu openly spread his wide sleeve along the edge of the table, intending to utilize it as a shield for him to hold Liao Jixiang's hand. Just as he was about to make his silly move, Mei Azha rushed in like a wildfire in the gust of wind. Spotting Xie Yulu, he growled, "What's that lowly thing doing here? Get off the table." All eyes turned to him. In this chamber, Mei Azha held the highest seniority. It was extremely unusual for him to lose his temper. "Have we no manners left? Now anyone could just dare to come to our table." A brief silence followed. Then, Zhang Xian stepped in to alleviate the tension. "Qi Gur," he smiled lazily as he threw his arm around Mei Azha's shoulder, "I had him play a couple of rounds for me. Look at you, getting angry for such a tiny thing." Mei Azha wasn't easily enraged, but when he did, he wouldn't spare anyone's face. "I don't care who you're trying to endorse, but don't you soil our dugong sleeves." He shoved Zhang Xian's arm aside. "Tell him to move." Mei Azha's remark was a rather hurtful insult, but Zhang Xian still tolerated him. all right, my dear brother," he said as he turned to Xie Yulu and gestured for him to move. Only then did he notice Xie Yulu's sleeve, which was indeed oddly draped over the table's edge, yet as he was left with little time to fathom what it meant, Zhang Xian tried to beguile Mei Azha. There, brother, you're no longer angry, aren't you?" Mei Azha remained silent with a grim face. Everyone present thought he was berating Zhang Xian, except for Liao Jixiang, who knew deep down that Mei Azha was chastising himself for being coquettish. "I'm tired, Qi Gur. It's good if you just can take over for me." Mei Azha abruptly lifted his head, as if his heart was pierced harshly by those words. Even if no one else could discern it, he understood that Liao Jixiang had forsaken him to support Xia Yulu instead. Before Xia Yulu could get up, Liao Jixiang rose first. The moment Liao Jixiang moved, Xia Yulu instinctively followed suit. As one of them was taking a step aside while the other was turning around, with a sudden clank, the two jade pendants around their waists incidentally tangled together. The pendant Liao Jixiang wore was a remarkable piece, a mutton fat jade encrusted with 7 precious gemstones in Buddhism, woven in gold and silver threads. On the contrary, Xia Yulu's pendant was truly shabby, merely a string of inexpensive agate beads. Almost instantly, the two flustered souls exchanged disturbed looks, their faces turning glistening red. Afraid of their secret being found out, Xia Yulu scrambled to pull out of the mess, yet as he did so, Liao Jixiang's waist shook following his force, his slender, graceful figure just like a willow branch in the wind. Well, well, Zheng Xian exclaimed like he was watching a joke, crossing his hands as he leaned on the edge of the table. If you were a man and a woman, this could become an opera. Liao Jixiang's eyelashes were trembling. Looking from this proximity, Xia Yulu felt as if those eyelashes were trembling in his heart, tickling his limbs, making them both numb and itchy. I'll help you untangle it. As he spoke, he reached out his hands, but how could Mei Azza allow such audacity? Pulling a tiny golden dagger from his boot, Mei Azza thrust it sternly between them. With one grab, he had Xia Yulu's poor agate beads in his own hand, unexpectedly and swiftly cutting it completely loose. With countless crackling and clattering, the unstrung beads hit the floor one after another. Liao Jixiang witnessed Xia Yulu's face turning pale right in front of him. Mei Azza had embarrassed him. Pitifully and pettily, he crouched on the floor, picking up those scattered beads one by one. Come now. Mei Azza put away his knife, strutting like a rooster that had just won a fight. I'll play 2 rounds for Lao Ba. Liao Jixiang didn't make a scene in front of everyone. With his clothes brushing gently against Xia Yulu, he walked past him and went behind a small folding screen. As soon as he was behind the folding screen, he immediately turned around and within a moment, Xia Yulu followed him in. And now was the time for true eye contact. Quietly and timidly, their souls entwined through their gazes. Out of eagerness for Xia Yulu to understand his feelings, Liao Jixiang rubbed his palm against his cheek, tainting his hand with a faint shade of rosy rouge, and extended his arm to show it to Xia Yulu. Red rouge and fair wrist, this was even more provoking than untying his clothes. Yang Chun, if I have you, Xia Yulu whispered as he clenched the agate beads in his hand, what more could I ask for? Liao Jixiang remained still, allowing Xia Yulu to approach him, to press himself against his sideburns, and deeply inhale Liao Jixiang's scent. How I wish I could hide you safely at home, which was an intimate phrase shared only between the two of them, so that I can love you, all day and all night. Liao Jixiang was rather shy. He lowered his head. In fact, he had some vague ideas about what love meant in this context, which was the most unmentionable taboo. Yet, as if he was about to play with fire despite knowing fully well of the consequences, Liao Jixiang was quite tempted to try. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The lanterns in the courtyard had just been lit when Jin Tang went sideways across the small garden towards Liao Jixiang's large chamber. From a distance, he could observe a few people huddled near the door, Yishiha, Zhang Chai and Alia with a long sword about his back. What are you up to? He approached and asked softly. Upon seeing him, Yishiha tried to slip away, yet Zhang Chai abruptly grabbed his sleeve. Chief Mei and Du Gong are quarreling, he said as he stepped back, so that Jin Tang could come closer to the door. What a ridiculous joke. Finding Zhang Chai's words hard to believe, Jin Tang pretended to be scornful of eavesdropping, although he had to do it out of necessity, and pressed his ear against the door. The muffled voices inside sounded truly like they were arguing. Behind the folding screen, what were you doing? With so many people outside, what could we possibly do? Chi-gur, you. Jintang couldn't make sense of it. What are they talking about? Chief Mei's been upset ever since he came back from accompanying Du Gong to play Meidiao this afternoon, said Zhang Chai, who had been holding onto Yashiha's sleeve, appearing rather spoiled and pampered under Jintang's favor as his brother. Sounds like it's about Xia Yulu. The mere mention of that name somewhat enlightened Jintang about what happened, so he pressed his ear back against the door, listened with a furrowed brow. You, don't make me force you. Even though Mei Azha was the one who started it, he was now stuttering, reluctant to confront Liao Jixiang with a direct question, did you too, did you? Liao Jixiang turned his head towards the potted plant on the table, refusing to answer. Lao Ba, Mei Azha was so anxious that he would rather hold onto Liao Jixiang's face and turn it towards him, rein yourself in. Still, Liao Jixiang fixed his gaze at the potted plant, replying dispassionately, what, now I can't even have someone to talk to. Mei Azha lunged at him, throwing himself at Liao Jixiang's feet and clasping his knees. If you want someone to talk to, you can have me or Jintang or those little ones, as if what he was about to utter was sticking his lips together, he struggled and finally said, as for that, that's a man. A man. Liao Jixiang's lips twitched. At last, he turned his head to look at Mei Azha but only for a quick glance before he immediately averted his gaze in guilty conscience. He mumbled, so what if he is a man? A man, Mei Azha appeared unsure about how to explain. After chewing on this question for a moment, he muttered, a man will always want to do some things. A gush of heat rose from Liao Jixiang's cheeks, surging across his face and staining his ears. Liao Jixiang's skin was flushed thoroughly red in an instant. Mei Azha was appalled. Grabbing Liao Jixiang by his hands, Mei Azha inquired incredulously, his voice trembling, did you let him, let him? Liao Jixiang wasn't entirely clear about the implication of this question. He felt like he might have, yet again he might have not. Mei Azha, fearing that Liao Jixiang might be too ingenuous to be the judge of things, he blurted out, did you let him take off your clothes? Though the words sounded explicit, they were actually reserved. Nevertheless, like a freshly plucked camellia blossom, Liao Jixiang's neck couldn't bear the weight of his shyness any longer, so he left it drooping low about his chest. What was on Mei Azha's mind, however, was much more unspeakable than only removing the clothes. You fool! He stood up abruptly, his fist tightly clenched as his body was surrounded by a murderous air. You're at least a fourth-rank official. What is he? Hatred made him gritted his teeth as he squeezed out these words, he's taking advantage of you, yet you allowed him to treat you like an entertainer, like a toy boy. Liao Jixiang was distressed by his words, as he defended himself woefully, he's not. Precisely so. Mei Azha glared at him in extreme exasperation, just how he wished that Liao Jixiang could know better. Just like when Zhang Fang went to Shaanxi without informing you, you also insisted that he wasn't that kind of person. At this point, Liao Jixiang began to waver, he couldn't help but clench his hands underneath his sleeves. He's different, Liao Jixiang whispered, if he were Zhang Fang, Zheng Xian wouldn't be able to control him. Mei Azha sneered. Of course everything about him would look nice when he's fooling you around. He suddenly slammed his palm on the table, but when he's had his fill of you, he'll toss you aside once and for all. Which was so loud that even those standing outside could clearly hear. Yashiha and Zhang Chai exchanged startled glances, whereas Jintang felt that this conversation had gone far enough, so he reached out to knock on the door. Du Gong, Xia Yulu is waiting at the side gate. Should we let him in? Mei Azha immediately growled, tell him to fuck off. And so Jintang waited for a moment. Since he received no further instructions from Liao Jixiang, he chased Liu away and sent Yashiha to the side gate to deliver the message. Then, he pulled Zhang Chai closer and commanded him, tell Yashiha, not to share a single word about today with anyone else. End chapter. Dadang. Chapter 30. With one of his hands holding the gate from closing and the other hand clinging to the frame of the gate, Xiaoyulo stuttered as he tried to stand his ground. Why am I not allowed in? He had let me in before. I shall go and ask him myself. This was in fact already the third time it happened. Liao Jixiang had denied him entry as well as refused to meet Xiaoyulo at Xiaolao Fountain. Like a lonesome wild goose that had suffered the loss of a companion, Xiaoyulo made a scene in front of Liao Jixiang's side gate in the middle of the night. The gatekeeper on duty was Jin Tang, who was initially polite but gradually lost his temper. Du Gong doesn't want to see you. You're at least a scholar, so why have you no manners and can't be reasoned with? While his words were harsh, the way his eyes landed on Xiaoyulo was full of curiosity and amusement. About those words he overheard through the door, Jin Tang couldn't be sure whether they were true or false. Does this shabby, incompetent man standing in front of him really have something going on with Du Gong? In fact, Jin Tang had wondered about such matters as well. Has their Du Gong, who always sits aloft and acts as freezingly cold and distant as ice and snow, truly committed something beneath himself, to take the female role under Xiaoyulo like an ordinary entertainer? He wants to see me. It's you who are stopping me. Xiaoyulo tried to push his way in. And at that moment, Jin Tang noticed a few figures flashing by around the corner of the opposite street, who were wearing pleated robes made up of greenish-blue plain fabric, tied around the waist with a narrow waistband and wearing white leather boots. They were Jin Yiwei agents. Go. Jin Tang turned towards the guards equipped with long swords. Go check it out. Taking advantage of the open gate as the guards left for their tasks, Xiaoyulo threw himself towards the gate and dashed inside, rushing in the direction of Liao Jixiang's main chamber with absolutely no regards for anything else. For a few times, those chasing after him had grabbed hold of his clothes, but he frantically shook them all off. By the time he finally collapsed at Liao Jixiang's doorstep, he was utterly disheveled, looking just like a desperate, homeless stray. A pair of feet in unadorned shoes halted before him, the size and shape all too familiar to Xiaoyulo. He took them in his tight embrace at once, lifting his head with deep, dense emotions. Liao Jixiang didn't look at him, rather, he was looking at the men standing outside the door, who came here chasing Xiaoyulo. With a slight wave of his hand, Liao Jixiang signaled for them to enter the chamber and bring Lord Zhang away. Once the door was shut after those men, only the two of them were left inside. Xiaoyulo hastily tore off his wangjin, the hat, the messy outer robe, and carelessly draped them on the edge of the table. Seeing his disheveled state, Liao Jixiang awkwardly turned his head away. Why won't you see me? Xiaoyulo asked, panting heavily. Only after a considerable pause did Liao Jixiang finally reply, there's something I need to deal with. Something? Xiaoyulo's eyes were fixed on piles after piles of letters stacked on the table, and his words were cold, or someone. Initially, Liao Jixiang didn't grasp his meaning. And when he did, his expression became rather distorted, his slim eyebrows twitched sharply with no intention to answer Xiaoyulo's question. Feeling hungry? Liao Jixiang pointed instead at a plate of delicate steamed cakes on a small table. Great rescue. He's also calling those things as great rescue. Xiaoyulo cast a glance over the plate, yet he remained unmoved, then tell Zhang Fang to wake up. Liao Jixiang couldn't fathom how this name came into play, but Xiaoyulo must have looked into his letters. While he should have been furious about it, the actual words that came out of his mouth turned out to be, but he's not you and he has no such odd intentions. However, like a little boy, Xiaoyulo complained as if he had been wronged. No such intentions. Just look at all those bitter poems. Liao Jixiang sighed as he found it impossible to reason with this man, yet Xiaoyulo pressed on stubbornly, if you truly care about me, write him a letter to end it. The entire chamber sank into absolute silence. Tension became almost tangible in the air. Xia Yulu insisted on standing his ground, waiting for Liao Jixiang to give in, and eventually, Liao Jixiang did. "What do you want me to write?" And so, Xia Yulu rolled up his sleeves, dipping a calligraphy brush in the ink and laying out a piece of paper as he said, "Come here." Which was downright unreasonable. Anyone else would have protested with "Why should I?" But Liao Jixiang was completely enchanted by Xia Yulu, so all he could do was to walk over slowly and gently, hesitating as he approached. The moment their bodies got closer, something felt different. Breaths were growing stickier, heavier, and the temperature between them became scorchingly hot. Liao Jixiang tried to take over the calligraphy brush, but Xia Yulu grabbed hold of his waist and pulled, so Liao Jixiang stumbled as he fell into Xia Yulu's embrace. With Xia Yulu's hand wrapping around his own, Liao Jixiang was guided to write down a few words. "As none of our past remains unresolved, how could there be any unforgettable love?" As they set the calligraphy brush down, Liao Jixiang lifted his head, his gaze puzzled and confused. "But, this is your calligraphy." It was at this moment that Xia Yulu realized his mistake, so he stammered stupidly, "Then, transcribe it on another piece of paper." And he let go of him. Full of lingering emotions, Xia Yulu fondly caressed the neat sideburns by Liao Jixiang's ear. "For the past few days, you've been merciless to me." Upon hearing such affectionate, tender reproach, Liao Jixiang felt ever so weak in the knees, so much so that they were no longer capable of supporting his body. As Liao Jixiang tightened his lips, Xia Yulu began talking again. "Did you miss me, even just for a little bit?" Evading all that he wanted, Liao Jixiang eventually yielded with a nod. Unable to hold himself back any longer, Xia Yulu grabbed Liao Jixiang, cupping those slightly blushing cheeks of his, and pecked him on the lips. After just one kiss, Xia Yulu let out a deep groan which sounded almost like he was trying to devour Liao Jixiang in one gulp. Then roughly and eagerly, he trapped Liao Jixiang tightly in his arms, fervently sucking his wet, slippery tongue, and frantically licking his burning hot cheek. His hands went about squeezing and kneading, distorting the flesh on his chin. During the whole time, Liao Jixiang looked at him timidly, just like a tiny bird with ruffled feathers in a storm, or a small grain of sand carried around helplessly by the waves. And again, his belly was poked by something hot. Liao Jixiang turned to look over the table in confusion. The fan was indeed placed over there with the robe, so, what's this thing pressing hard against him? Despite all his innocence and inexperience, Liao Jixiang became enlightened all of a sudden. With all his strength, he desperately pushed against Xia Yulu and tried to back away, yet he couldn't, so he could only turn his waist sideways and lift his buttocks to avoid touching Xia Yulu down there. However, with every inch he retreated, Xia Yulu pressed even closer by 2 inches more. The two of them wrestled until Liao Jixiang was pinned against the antique shelf that was filled with ancient treasures. With a loud thud, the tall wooden shelf shook under their movements. Someone immediately called from outside the door, "Du Gong." "I'm Fin." As soon as Liao Jixiang opened his mouth, he realized how hoarse his voice had become. He could have summoned someone in to end this ridiculous deed, yet he chose to endure and remain silent. "Yang Chun," Xia Yulu nibbled Liao Jixiang's ear as he whispered, his hands wandering around his back, "Why are you hiding?" "How could I not?" Liao Jixiang was so flustered that he didn't dare to look at Xia Yulu. The embarrassment he felt made it challenging to even open his eyes. "You're touching me." He was referring to the object down there, which Xia Yulu understood. Yet, instead of moving away, Xia Yulu became even bolder, tightening his arms around Liao Jixiang even more and pounded his lower body hard against him. "This is utterly shameless." Liao Jixiang glared at him, appalled. "My bodhisattva." Xia Yulu bit his teeth and stomped his feet, his face equally red as Liao Jixiang's. "I won't allow those so-called honorable qualities to chain me up anymore." As he said so, he tugged on Liao Jixiang and directly dragged him towards the spacious bed. Being somewhat startled by his action, Liao Jixiang struggled sluggishly while threatening softly, "I'm calling them in. I really am." The more Liao Jixiang anxiously threatened to call them in, the more eager and stubborn Xie Yulu became. He kissed and sucked Liao Jixiang's cheeks, leaving loud smooches as if he had no shame. Liao Jixiang was growing increasingly apprehensive. In order not to land onto the bed, he lowered himself so that he could sit on the floor instead. "I can't," he pleaded, even uttering the most self-deprecating words, "I'm a eunuch." Xie Yulu felt a sudden surge of pain in his heart. "I don't care what you are." He turned away from the bed, and forcefully carried Liao Jixiang to put him between two parallel antique shelves. Within that narrow space, Xie Yulu cornered Liao Jixiang, pressing him down with his arms, blocking any possible chance of escape. "What are you doing in my territory?" Liao Jixiang finally put up a tough attitude, only to find that Xie Yulu wasn't afraid of him at all. That lofty, arrogant dedang was reserved for everyone else but to Xie Yulu. Liao Jixiang was always gentle as a young girl. "I want to please you." Xie Yulu's gaze was full of determination. He gripped Liao Jixiang's collar and was ready to tear it apart. Liao Jixiang immediately stopped his hands, as he suddenly recalled Mei Azaw's words, "You allowed him to treat you like an entertainer, like a toy boy." Unable to invade from the top, Xie Yulu's hands went down below. They lifted the hem of Liao Jixiang's yesa and reached from under his pleated skirt, anxiously tugging at his belt. Liao Jixiang was helpless under Xie Yulu's persistent bullying, so he could only wriggle and try to wrench free like an ant on a hot pan. As Liao Jixiang's belt was tightly tied and couldn't be tugged loose, Xie Yulu's hand decisively went around his back, grasped his pants near the waist and tried to pull them down from behind. Yet the pants stubbornly held onto Liao Jixiang's waist, and moments of effort from Xie Yulu's hand were completely futile. All it achieved was to feel for a patch of skin on Liao Jixiang's lower back. A eunuch's skin was smooth, almost oily, like a piece of shiny rice cake soaked in water. Xie Yulu pinched that region audaciously, while Liao Jixiang was forced to lean against his chest, trembling. The moment Xie Yulu's mouth came near, he would turn his face away with displeasure. "Untie your pants," Xie Yulu said, quickly, "be good." Liao Jixiang didn't move. "I only want to touch them," Xie Yulu coaxed him, "only your legs." Still, Liao Jixiang didn't move. I can't hold myself anymore. Just let me have a look and you'll be my savior." Which was such a ridiculous, blatant lie, yet Liao Jixiang actually believed it. His hands hesitantly reached into his pleated skirt. "Only my legs. Only your legs." Xie Yulu cajoled him, although, deep down, he would die for a chance to peek every inch of his naked body. Liao Jixiang moved very slowly. With his head lowered, his fingers went for the knot of his tied belt. As soon as he undid the knot, Xie Yulu couldn't bear to wait any longer and lifted the hem of Liao Jixiang's yesa, trying to pull the pants down. So, Liao Jixiang immediately regretted his compromise, holding onto his waistband firmly, refusing to let go. Almost violently, Xie Yulu tugged the pants downward. Seeing how the pants still clung to Liao Jixiang's waist, Xie Yulu grew rather irritated and frustrated, so grabbing Liao Jixiang by his shoulders, Xie Yulu flipped him over and swiftly tore his pants off of him. Liao Jixiang cried out in shock. Oddly enough, no one came to inquire about them this time. So, Xie Yulu became even more unreserved and fearless, completely lifting up the yes's heavy fabric woven with golden threads, and cradled Liao Jixiang's exposed waist to gaze at that snow-white buttocks. It was truly snow-white. Due to years of horse riding back in Gansu, Liao Jixiang's butt cheeks were small and delicate, and at the moment, they were tight with embarrassment, twitching slightly due to the tension. "What are you doing?" The skin around Liao Jixiang's eyes was reddening. Xiaoyulo tried and tried to suppress his lust, and finally, he couldn't resist the temptation and touched Liao Jixiang. As it was a place that had never been touched by anyone before, Liao Jixiang was sent jumping in shock. "You said only my legs." He stretched his arms awkwardly behind his back, futilely trying to push Xiaoyulo away. "Legs?" Xiaoyulo's eyes shifted down from the buttocks. The silk pants were now piled about the ankles, revealing two smooth and straight legs. "The legs too," he said, as he grabbed the root of Liao Jixiang's thighs. The skin of the thighs felt softer than a male's and firmer than a female's, a gorgeous piece of art in between the two sexes. "Are all eunuchs like this?" Xiaoyulo couldn't help being surprised. "Let me go." "I don't want to." What a poor fool Liao Jixiang was. How could a man stop once he took off his pants? Yet Liao Jixiang had no idea, as he kept on wriggling his defenseless flesh. Seeing such a fair buttocks wiggling in front of his eyes was just like having an invisible hand clasping his throat. Xiaoyulo undid his own belt impatiently and shook off his pants, his wrists shivering. Only that Liao Jixiang had no knowledge of what happened behind him. He wriggled and struggled, and didn't even try to hide when a hot, slippery block of flesh came pressed against his buttocks. "Yang Chun." Only until Xiaoyulo rubbed his sticky self against Liao Jixiang's hips did he understand what was going on. But by this time, it was already too late. He was completely stuck in the crook of Xiaoyulo's arms, swaying and bumping repeatedly with his frantic rhythm. When he guessed what object of Xiaoyulo was pounding on top of his ass, the shame, the indignation, and the disbelief he felt was beyond description. But still, he couldn't control himself. As if his voice was bumped out of his chest, pushed forth briefly with every rubbing or pounding motion, his moans came flooding out without a stop. Even though his moans sounded soft, it was as loud as thunder to Xiaoyulo, an almost solid whip on his body, making him harden faster and thrust harder. "Yang Chun, Yang Chun." He uttered his name repeatedly. "I'm a jerk. Let me be damned." Since he had said so, Liao Jixiang forgave him, and couldn't allow himself to curse Xiaoyulo anymore. "Then, stop right there." "I can't." Xiaoyulo heedlessly massaged his huge thing on Liao Jixiang's round buttocks, leaving the two white cheeks shiny and slippery. "Just a moment till I come." Liao Jixiang's entire face was now glistening red, his hair cap got loose and the hair above his forehead was disheveled, sticking to his face after being soaked in his sweat. What's coming? Xiaoyulo couldn't explain, nor could the current situation allow him to. His hand reached out from under Liao Jixiang's armpit to his chest, dived in through the gap of his collar, pinched one of the nipples, and squeezed it seductively. "Xie Chun Chu!" Liao Jixiang shouted in rage, his teeth clenching while he trembled. The flesh of his butt cheeks probably softened from repeated rubbing, so with an unintentional push, Xiaoyulo coincidentally bumped into the crack between Liao Jixiang's buttocks. Both of them moaned simultaneously. Under the tender, soft, and moist pressure of the flesh, Xiaoyulo's burning hardness came to its unprepared release. Their movement at the climax was so strong, that the parallel antique shelves on both sides of them shook, and with a loud crash, a large vase fell down and hit the floor. Judging by the sound, it probably had been shattered, yet even so, no one outside came to disturb them. Xiaoyulo calmed down as his clothes was soaked through and through in sweat, and was finally able to take a proper look at the reckless things he committed. Liao Jixiang's buttocks were a complete mess. They were covered by his seed, which oozed from the slightly opened crack and dripped down in stickiness. "I've sinned." Xiaoyulo panicked and turned around right away for a handkerchief. Fetching it from the table, he meticulously helped Liao Jixiang clean up. After wiping back and forth in the crack of the buttocks several times, he retreated awkwardly in shame. Liao Jixiang turned over with his neck retracted, his hands clenching the waist of his pants the whole time. As his hands were fixed in one position for too long, his knuckles were already stiff. Liao Jixiang watched as Xie Yulu folded the dirty handkerchief, and was surprised to find that he kept it in his chest pocket. The moment Xie Yulu turned around, Liao Jixiang immediately looked away, blushing and pretending not to notice anything. So, in guilt and in shame, Xie Yulu pointed at the broken porcelain on the floor. A pity. What came falling with it was a sandalwood box, inside which was a plain paper fan that couldn't be more commonplace. A glimpse of the half-opened fan that unfolded during its fall revealed the words written on the fan's surface, the date when the fish encountered the water, the time when the winds reached the cloud. Go away. Liao Jixiang pulled up his pants and said angrily. Because of the guilt Xie Yulu felt towards him, he didn't dare to stay any longer. Dejectedly, he pushed the door open, left the chamber and closed the door behind him. As he turned around and lifted his head, he saw Zhang Chai, Yishiha and Aliu, all standing there and staring at him oddly with resentment. They knew. Feeling shocked, Xie Yulu lowered his head and walked away. When he went past them, someone stretched out his leg and tripped him out of nowhere, leaving him falling face down to the ground with his hands landing first. End chapter.